I'm very proud and I celebrate this with you today, and I mihi to you all. Kia ora tātou katoa.
I call the Honourable Member Materia Turei. Tēnā koe.
Tēnā koe, Mr Speaker, e te manga o te whare tēnā koe, tuarua ki ngā memo o tō tātou whare tēnā koutou katoa. Tua toru, mihi atu ki te wiki o te reo Māori, tēnā koutou katoa. And to Rongowhakaata, to Nauri o te kōti Rikirangi, tēnā koutou katoa. The Green Party is pleased to support this legislation at its third reading and to see this bill passed. I want to acknowledge the contribution made by my colleague Catherine Delahunty in the second reading. Catherine Delahunty was resident in this rohe, as she talked about at that time, and has a very strong personal connection to this area and to the people there, and talked about that personal experience of being a Pākehā woman living in this rohe, knowing these stories and the hardship that resulted or that was suffered by the mana whenua in these areas. Those kinds of contributions, particularly I think from Pākehā, are very important in this House, because it recognises that as each person speaks to stand and say what their experience was and how they have related to those issues in their life, it acknowledges that tangata tiriti have a role in this country and have a place to stand in this country and are as much part of the history of the process of colonisation as any other, and that we can take, therefore, responsibility for our role as a citizen in a country that has been colonised, that we can acknowledge the history of hurt that was caused by the state which represents us, by the government forces that have represented us, perhaps even by our own whānau in some circumstances in the past, not with a sense of guilt, but with a sense of acknowledgement and peace and justice. And it's a very important contribution to make. So I appreciate that I have the opportunity today to speak as a Māori woman, kahanunu, Ātiho woman, on this legislation, and to congratulate Rongowhakaata for all of their work in bringing this legislation into the House, as well as all of those who have spoken before me on this legislation. Tēnā koutou katoa. The history of of Rongowhakaata is probably one of the better known histories, actually. It's been written about in various forms because of the extraordinary personality that was Te Kooti and the abuse of that history, really, of the genuine history of Te Kooti at this time. So it is actually one of the stories, perhaps, that is one of the better known, although probably quite badly misrepresented over time. So I agree with my colleague from Labour, who talks about the need for these stories to be told in their fullness, and from the mana whenua perspective about what happened during those times, so that the history that our kids have and that their kids will have is an honest and true one, and shows both sides, if you like. And it's okay that those stories might be different, but there are two stories to be told, and both are essential. 22 rangatira of Rongowhakaata signed the treaty. They were invaded by military forces, government forces. Members of Rongowhakaata were killed. They were exiled. A number were exiled. They were rescued by Te Kooti. And there was retaliation by Te Kooti against those who were part of that exile process. And as a result, the Crown forces came in very hard on the hapu and iwi there, capturing the pā and executing a number of the members of the prisoners caught in that process. That is set out quite well in the bill, and I think it's good that it is, because again, that's a very explicit description of the story. But as a result, Rongowhakaata lost virtually all their land and were left almost entirely landless. The titles were individualised. We have heard the story repeated a few times today, so that it became even more difficult for Rongowhakaata to retain any kind of control over their own natural resources. The settlement process is designed to return some kind of compensation some kind of redress for the actions of the Crown. And it's we talk a lot in this House during treaty settlements about the generosity of iwi in accepting these settlements, knowing that the redress, the compensation for the harms caused just is absolutely minute compared to the harm and the hurt that they have suffered. I want to again acknowledge that generosity, partly for Rongowhakaata, partly to Rongowhakaata to acknowledge your generosity, but actually because it is the rest of the community who need to understand the extent of that generosity. The Green Party has always said, from the time that we started here in Parliament at our parliamentary presence, that the treaty settlement process was not a just one. And we have, without apology, talked during treaty settlement debates about the Crown failures. And we consider it part of our fundamental responsibility when we stand up in this House and talk about treaty settlements, not only to acknowledge the iwi and all of the work that goes into seeing them come to the House at this point, but to also hold the Crown to account for its failures. It is a necessary part of this process, however uncomfortable for whichever government is currently running the country. And we have said the same things when Labour was in government, and we have said the same things when National was in government. The settlement process itself has flaws, and that those flaws create undue hardship for the iwi who, in good faith, genuine good faith, are working with the Crown as best they can to find some redress for their whānau, for their iwi and hapu, so that they can move on, at least at this point. It is important, in our view, that we do, as the Green Party, that we do hold the Crown to account, because there are few others who are able to do so, and it is part of our critical role here in Parliament. To that extent, I feel compelled to acknowledge not only the importance of the return of the whare in this legislation and what that means for Rongowhakaata, but also to express our concern, our real concern, that Rongowhakaata are not required to carry the burden of the return of that whare. It is their right and entitlement to have it back as they see fit, in the way that they see fit, at a time that they see fit. And it remains, in our view, an ongoing obligation to the Crown to make sure that that whare and Rongowhakaata have what they need to care for that whare as they see fit, well into the future. This would be a clear demonstration by the Crown of what the Minister was talking about earlier, which is the actions by the Crown from this point on that that develop a relationship of trust with Rongowhakaata. That is the actions of the Crown that count from this point on. And one of the actions that the Crown can commit to is that they will ensure Rongowhakaata have everything they need at every step of the way to make sure that that whare is returned, and returned in a way that it can be cared for well into the future. That would be a clear demonstration of good faith by the Crown to an ongoing relationship, in our view. I want to finally, sir, acknowledge those who have died in the process by which this, during the time that this settlement has come to Parliament. As we know, settlements take a long time. People who work on them don't often see them to fruition. To acknowledge the work of all those who will see the settlement work into the future, and wish Rongowhakaata, Nauri o Te Koti Irakirangi, the best wishes for the future. Kia ora.
Honourable Peter Sharples. Tēnā koe.